The surface of the moon is scarred with tens of thousands of impact craters of various sizes. Scientists suggest this is due to the fact that there has never been an atmosphere on the moon to help protect it from bombardment by space debris. There are no natural erosive forces, like wind or flowing water, to affect its surface. And there is little geologic activity to conceal damage done throughout the moon's history.
When you study the distribution of craters, you find the surface is totally saturated. That is, that there are craters within craters within craters, right down to the smallest scale of size.
One of the things that's really interesting about lunar craters is that even though some of them are very large and some of them are very small, they all seem to have the same depth. And that really shouldn't happen on a planetary body. There should be variation in depth. So why are the moon's craters so uniform? It's really, really unusual, and it's really not explainable in terms of conventional or established geophysics.
Some of the craters on the moon are nowhere near similar to what they should look like. In fact, they are incredibly wide craters, and wherever the impact point is, they're convex, which means there's still the bulge of the moon, so this doesn't make any sense.
It's likely that there is something under the lunar surface which is very resilient and which is preventing craters going any deeper than they do. This could only really be either much harder rock, which it can't be because of the mass of the moon, or alternatively a metal sphere of some kind which is preventing more damage.
Does the uniform depth of the craters on the moon suggest some sort of metallic barrier underneath moon rock and dust? But if so, why wouldn't mainstream scientists acknowledge this? Ancient astronaut theorists suggest that by doing so, they might also have to acknowledge that the moon may be hollow.
Yankee Clipper, Houston.
November 20th, 1969. During their ascent back to the command module, Commander Charles Conrad Jr. and lunar module pilot Alan Bean release the Apollo 12 launch vehicle and crash it back to the moon.
Apollo 12, Houston, the LEM is on its way down. Roger.
Upon impact, something very unexpected happened. The moon was said to have seismically reverberated like a bell for more than an hour.
With Apollo 12, people referred to a crash. It wasn't really a crash. It was a aimed deorbit of the rocket used to lift off the lunar module. And the crew separated the launch vehicle and crashed it back into the ground right close to where they had a seismograph that they had installed down there. Well, it vibrated, so it was kind of an early clue as to how solid was the surface of the moon.
What was amazing about this is that suddenly the moon began to ring like a bell and did so for nearly an hour. Dr. Werner von Braun, who was then the head of NASA, decided that for Apollo 13, they were going to intentionally crash a heavier portion of the rocket into the lunar surface. And when they did this, the moon rang like a gong this time for over 3 hours into a depth of over 20 miles.
This was not expected, and it still puzzles a lot of scientists today. The inference is that the moon must be hollow because the moon is made predominantly on the surface of a kind of rock called basalt. Although it's a very lightweight rock, it also absorbs impact extremely well. And so if the whole of the moon was made of that kind of rock, you wouldn't expect it to reverberate when a large impact took place. The reason that this is played down is because the idea of the moon being hollow just contradicts what we know about physics.
Yankee Clipper, Houston.
November 20th, 1969. During their ascent back to the command module, Commander Charles Conrad Jr. and lunar module pilot Alan Bean release the Apollo 12 launch vehicle and crash it back to the moon.
Apollo 12, Houston, the LEM is on its way down. Roger.
Upon impact, something very unexpected happened. The moon was said to have seismically reverberated like a bell for more than an hour.
With Apollo 12, people referred to a crash. It wasn't really a crash. It was a aimed deorbit of the rocket used to lift off the lunar module. And the crew separated the launch vehicle and crashed it back into the ground right close to where they had a seismograph that they had installed down there. Well, it vibrated, so it was kind of an early clue as to how solid was the surface of the moon.
What was amazing about this is that suddenly the moon began to ring like a bell and did so for nearly an hour. Dr. Wernher von Braun, who was then the head of NASA, decided that for Apollo 13, they were going to intentionally crash a heavier portion of the rocket into the lunar surface. And when they did this, the moon rang like a gong this time for over 3 hours into a depth of over 20 miles.
This was not expected, and it still puzzles a lot of scientists today. The inference is that the moon must be hollow because the moon is made predominantly on the surface of a kind of rock called basalt. Although it's a very lightweight rock, it also absorbs impact extremely well. And so if the whole of the moon was made of that kind of rock, you wouldn't expect it to reverberate when a large impact took place. The reason that this is played down is because the idea of the moon being hollow just contradicts what we know about physics.
In his 1966 book, Intelligent Life in the Universe, renowned scientist and astronomer Carl Sagan defined modern scholarship regarding the composition of celestial bodies throughout the cosmos.
Carl Sagan suggested that a natural satellite cannot be a hollow object. This is very odd, because why would the moon be vibrating unless it's a hollow object? That would suggest it's artificial.
Significant portions of the moon may have been hollowed out. If that is the case, the chances are that was not achieved naturally. That would have to have been achieved artificially. This brings up the important question, who would have had the ability, the skills and the technology to do that? Certainly not us. That would only have to be the work of extraterrestrials and no one else.
Humans have been mesmerized by the moon since the dawn of man. And although many theories have been proposed, scientists cannot say with absolute certainty how this celestial object came into being.
When I was a student, nobody really knew where the moon came from, and because it's so relatively big, this was a real problem. And I think that there is a tendency to think that moons get somehow captured by the parent planets. If you've got one body here and another body coming along, it can't just get trapped into orbit like that. The difficulty there is just basic physics. So this remained a puzzle until about 20 years ago, when another theory came along, and that is that the proto-Earth was very early on in the history of the solar system hit by a Mars-sized body, hit obliquely, that this Mars-sized body ploughed into the center of the Earth and became the Earth's core, and a lot of the outer material got stripped off by this gargantuan collision and coalesced to form the moon.
Now, they had to come up with a very bizarre theory for how the moon came into being, because all the conventional theories don't make any sense. The best theory of the moon's formation is phantasmagorically catastrophic collision of two things, at just the right angle to form this belt of debris that then formed the moon. But the moon, its exact size is such that it gives us total eclipses. Its disk exactly covers the sun. And the chances of that occurring are so literally astronomically small. It's very disturbing.
The sun's diameter is 400 times greater than the moon. And coincidentally, the sun also happens to be nearly precisely 400 times further away. This is the reason that the sun and the moon appear the same size in the Earth's sky, and why we on Earth can experience eclipses of the sun.
It's just perfectly in that orbit to eclipse our sun. The odds of the moon being in that orbit accidentally are a zillion to 1. So that right there is evidence that our moon is in a perfect orbit around our planet that's not accidental.
In order to have a solar eclipse, the moon has to be exactly the size that it is, which is 2,160 miles. Not 2,161, not 2,159, but 2,160 miles at its equator. And there are people out there that actually think that's a coincidence. The fact is that that is by design.
Throughout our observable galaxy, this relationship and others have not been duplicated. Other moons are sizably smaller by comparison to their mother planet. Earth's satellite not only orbits closer than it should for its size, it is also the only moon in the solar system that has a near-perfect circular orbit. And no other lunar bodies are known to have such a stabilizing role as the moon has with the Earth.
Recent computer simulations have shown that without the moon's presence, the Earth's axis tilt would be completely different than it is today. We might not even have seasons as we know them presently. Without the seasons, it could be very difficult for life on Earth. So the moon is actually performing an incredible function. It's life-sustaining. Without it, we might not be here.
In the early 1950s, the American public seemed to have an insatiable appetite for science fiction. It seemed that in the wake of the atomic bomb, anything was possible. Wernher von Braun viewed this fixation as his opportunity to get the public to share in his dream of space exploration, and initiated a plan to turn science fiction into science fact. In 1952, he captured the public's imagination with an illustrated series of articles in Collier's magazine depicting life in space.
Wernher von Braun was a mixture of scientist, engineer, and visionary. Von Braun was that rare combination, and perhaps the mystic visionary in him lifted his work above the common sphere of scientific and engineering achievement.
After the Soviet Union launched Sputnik in 1957 and became the first country to send a man-made object into Earth's orbit, America's interest in space shifted into high gear. And over the next several years, Wernher von Braun led the design team that sent the first American satellite into space and a man into orbit. All aboard rockets based on von Braun's original V2 designs.
3, 2, 1.
But as impressive as these feats were, the next step man would take would be far greater than any that had come before.
Radio check and verify.
On July 20th, 1969, 57-year-old Wernher von Braun watched from inside Mission Control as a human being, for the first time in history, stepped foot on a celestial body other than Earth.
We copy it down, Eagle. Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Wernher von Braun's boyhood dream, which so many had called an impossible feat, had become a reality.
We effectively went from horse and buggy to landing people on the moon in 60 years. It's exponential increase in technology. It's an absolute explosion. It's phenomenal that we came so far so fast.
Getting to the moon involves extremely precise orbital calculations, and the possibility of missing the moon, of not capturing it into an orbit, is a matter of a tiny fraction of a degree in the trajectory and a small percentage of the speed coming in. So the ability to adjust the orbit in real time and adjust those calculations was a stunning achievement.
But how did von Braun know all the specific information needed to calculate not only how to send man to the moon, but to bring him back to Earth? Where did he get data such as the exact gravitational pull of the moon, the speed needed to break Earth's orbit, or the effects of space radiation on the ship?
I consider it to be entirely possible that the endowment of extraterrestrial technology that fell into the hands of guys like Wernher von Braun was in fact a key element that allowed us to make technological leaps forward much faster than we ever would have been able to do if we were without the benefit of this advanced technology.
Wernher von Braun wanted to go further than just send people to the moon and bring them back. Ultimately, he was talking about colonies in space. Maybe it was inspired by something extraterrestrial.
Could it be that von Braun was not only guided by an alien intelligence, but that the incredible achievement of reaching the moon really was made possible with the help of extraterrestrial technology?